So, hello everybody, and welcome to Doctors for the Environment Australia's webinar, Quitting Our Oil Dependency, How to Protect Our Communities from Global Oil Volatility for a Healthier Australia. My name is Dr. Kate Wylie, and I'm Executive Director of Doctors for the Environment Australia, and it is my great pleasure to be facilitating our webinar this evening, where I am joined by Peter Holding from Farmers for Climate Action. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
And Dr. Kim Humphrey from DEA. Hello, Kim. Hi, Kim. And Francis Vierboom from Rewiring Australia. Hello, Francis. Welcome.
Right.
Hi. I'd like to acknowledge that the nation we call Australia is stolen land and that First Nations people have never ceded their sovereignty of their land. And I offer my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island nations and people. I'm calling in today from Ghana land. So hello to a group of people in Ghana is Namani. So Namani. And I'd invite you all to write the name of the nation you are on in the chat as a sign of respect. I also want to acknowledge the planetary health emergency. We're in the danger zone now for 7 of 9 planetary health boundaries, mainly due to our human-made actions of our dependence on fossil fuels and deforestation. A bit of housekeeping. We are being recorded, and this recording will go on our website and on YouTube. So please keep yourself on mute. We will have a discussion and then open up for about half an hour with our guests, and then we'll open up to questions from the floor at the end. So the first thing I just want to acknowledge is that this is actually a very difficult topic, and that the conflict in the Middle East is a health and human rights disaster. And, my heart goes out to all of those that are affected by this tragedy, in the Middle East and across the planet. For us in Australia, it's highlighted how our dependence on oil has left households, communities, hospitals, essential services, the whole of our society basically exposed. And that, we do have renewable resources which perhaps offer a path to a cleaner, healthier, and more resilient future. And tonight we're going to have a discussion about that, see where it takes us. As I said, this is a big, difficult topic. I don't expect us to have all the answers to such a massive global problem, but at least we're going to open up and have a bit of a discussion. So let's meet our panel. So my first I'll start with you, please, Peter. Hello. Could you just say briefly, what are the top line things that you're worrying about this week as we see petrol and diesel supplies threatened in Australia?
Well, good evening. And yeah, the main thing I'm concerned about is our farmer members planting, getting crops in or getting crops harvested.
Thank you.
Requires an enormous amount of diesel and it requires an enormous amount of urea. And I was working on the costings and it costs about $260 of urea to grow a ton of canola, about half that for wheat, and that makes it almost unviable to grow when you consider all the other costs that you've got to add in to put a crop in. So I'm very concerned about where we're headed with cropping this week.
I think that probably has implications for Kim's answer to the same question. Hello, Kim. What's the top line things that you're worrying about with this global instability?
Yeah, thanks, Kate, and thanks, Peter. So obviously I come at this from a health perspective. So my background is both as an emergency medicine physician and I work in public health as well. It's all very concerning as Kate has sort of outlined at the top there. I guess the top three things that I'm most concerned about this week. Number one is the continuity of essential health services. So we know that our health service really across Australia is still mostly fuel dependent. That's been part of health that's particularly hard to decarbonise. Our ambulances, patient transport, home care visits, pathology, medicine supply chains all rely almost entirely on petrol and diesel, and even really short disruptions to those can turn into patient safety issues really quickly as well, not to mention the costs that are being borne if you can't afford to get petrol. So that's a big one. Second is the immediate impact on people who are at risk. So we're thinking about groups like older Australians, people with chronic disease or disability, and those in rural and regional areas, in particular, are really exposed to what we're facing at the moment. Many of them already face barriers to getting good health care, and fuel shortages just make access so much harder as well. And then the last part, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the community stress and anxiety, all of the uncertainty, around not only the world situation, but can I get petrol? Can I get to work? Can I access healthcare? Incredibly stressful. And the uncertainty itself becomes a health issue then, particularly those families who are already struggling as well. So all of this is not just energy or transport, it's an immediate public health risk that can escalate very quickly if we don't manage this well.
Thank you, Kim. And I feel like, I'm sure Peter's communities would be feeling that sort of mental health distress that you mentioned there at the end. What about you, Francis? What are the top line things you're worrying about this week as we see our petrol and diesel supplies threatened?
Yeah, it's great to join this webinar on an important topic, Kate. I think the figure that stood out to me that I've seen this week is that Australia uses about it's 7.7 barrels, which is 1,200 liters of diesel per person to keep our economy going per year. And that's by far the biggest usage in the developed world per person. And the next closest oil importer is Germany, that is nearly half of that. So, the three, four, or two, three, and four are the US, Canada, and Saudi Arabia behind us. So we're an economy and a country that's incredibly dependent on importing that fuel source. Um, yeah, it actually shocked me to learn that we're top of that league table, and yeah, so much of our mining and agriculture is going to be hit really hard, and it's such a big job to actually turn over our dependence on that.
So many far-reaching problems, isn't it? And so let's come back to you, Kim, and get you to pick up on the health stuff on that. What can you expand a bit on your introduction? Like, what other health issues do you see? Considering also obviously mainly health practitioners in the room, and yeah, sort of flow on, please.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I guess with something like this, the health impacts tend to show up much faster than we expect they will. We kind of don't think about this as a health crisis, although this is what is happening is a health crisis. So the most immediate issue, as I outlined, is health system functionality. So ambulance services, logistics, etc., all of these things, and particularly in regional and remote areas, these are already discussions that are happening about how can we support our regional and remote communities, including our Aboriginal communities, because they are almost entirely reliant on diesel, not just to drive around, but for things like generators as well. And even very minor disruptions can increase response times and really first force services to start thinking about who gets treated or who gets care first. And that's an incredibly scary thing, I think, in the first world context that we live in as well. Closely linked to that is continuity of treatment. So the fact that many medications and medical supplies are on very tight delivery schedules. And if there's even a small interruption or delay, that significantly affects people who have medical conditions that really rely on sort of those time critical interventions. So we're thinking about people with diabetes, respiratory disease, people who are on dialysis, anything with a condition where a missed dose or a delayed treatment can lead to really rapid consequences. So any of you in the room, and I know it's many of you who are health professionals, can probably think of an example where if a patient doesn't get a particular treatment within a particular time frame, it's a big problem. So that's the kind of thing that we'll see. Other rural and regional impacts. So people who live in the regions, as I sort of referred to before, they already travel really long distances often for appointments and treatment. When fuel is scarce and expensive like it is at the moment, then it's a choice. You go, I can't afford to do that. I can't. I have to ration my trips. I'm not going to go and, seek my appointment this week, which perhaps is part of preventive healthcare. So it may not be an emergency, but if you don't attend those appointments, then health conditions can escalate and then it is an emergency as well. So all of these things kind of add together to really put us in a situation where we really need to be sort of waving the flag about what this means for health as well. It's not just about the price point at the Bowser, it's about all of these things. And then it's about mental health and the fact that, is it petrol or groceries? Do I go and see the doctor? Do I try and put bread on the table? That's kind of what we're looking at the moment. So it's really a public health crisis.
Absolutely, it is. And I just want to pick up on a couple of points you made there about um, medicine supplies. So, do you know much about how, and if you don't, Kim, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. Like,
That's all good.
probably know more about it than I do. Like, are there any really concerning medicines where we're likely to run out of supply? Would that happen? And,
Yeah, look, I can't comment too much on the actual logistics of pharmaceuticals. Just as an aside, and sort of Angie Bone, who I know is on the call, and I were talking about this yesterday, is the fact that I think a very significant percentage of our pharmaceuticals are petrochemical based. So let's just put that aside for a minute. We won't delve too deeply into that. But we're really thinking about anything, because if we're thinking about the supply chain and fuel shortages exposing the lack of resilience, we have a very efficient health system in Australia, but it runs on kind of just in time supply chains and stable external conditions. And when we have something like this, there's very little buffer. So there's the risk that anything we can think of that requires transport, that requires anything that involves fossil fuels, like oil in this case, is at risk essentially as well. Yeah.
yeah, you put that in with vulnerable populations, and a few of the points you touched on made me think about remote Aboriginal communities, particularly the dialysis patients up there, and what this must mean for their access to healthcare and their long-term outcomes. Yes, I mean, obviously we can only touch on it, but it's a massive problem. And I suppose that, turning to you now, Francis, that whole thing about energy supply and infrastructure and what you were referring to before, that where we are in the sort of the global diesel chain. What
Mm.
does this mean for you? What do you sort of
Well, Rewiring Australia, we've always been a kind of solutions-focused organization. And Dr. Saul Griffith wrote The Big Switch, which really unpacked a story that kind of stacks up the machines that are in our economy, and really, I think, points to the kind of obvious and basic fact that actually the solution for Australia to both emissions and especially to reducing dependence on oil is to think about how we actually cycle through the machines that rely on fossil fuels. So right now, the thing that's in the news is the fact that so many people want to go and fund an electric vehicle, and to be honest, it's actually an incredible moment. I think that's gonna change things in a significant way, and I think we're going to talk about this turning point, hopefully in a positive sense, maybe in a decade from now, because I was in Canberra yesterday and this morning. I've just driven back this afternoon. I was attending a fuel conference about electric trucks, and it had been organized 12 months ago. But let me tell you, the companies that turned up to demonstrate the fact that they can already do freight management with electric trucks. There's never been a better timed conference at Parliament House, I think, in history. And it was really good to be able to have a lot of politicians see that the answers are already on the road and rolling around. Um, the thing that I was talking with politicians about was about the EV salary packaging discount that's currently in place, but which has been tagged for a budget cut. And I think that the government is rethinking that really hard right now. And we were there to encourage them to keep pushing on that, because actually it's really important to identify ways that affect someone's decision making on the day when they're thinking about their next car. And to think really clearly about the fact that that's about the new car market, that if we can affect the share of EVs in the new car market and work that from the current 10%, it needs to get to 100%. And that needs to happen at some point as soon as possible. There's still a few models that aren't available, but there's a lot of electric SUVs, there's a lot of electric sedans, and the utes are starting to come into the market. So the opportunity's there, and we actually think there's a really strong case for the government to think a lot more about salary packaging some more, or looking to extend potentially like tax deductions to more people who might not get access to salary packaging through their workplace, so that similarly, like a wider range of people can look at that incentive when they're thinking about a new car and get that EV. And the benefit of that is not just that we take off, one machine that relies on imported petrol off the road, but at the same time we add a battery on wheels that's doing a transport job 4% of the time. And if we plug it in, can play a really important role in the electricity grid the other 96% of the time when it's not driving around. And by the time we electrify all of the kinds of buses and trucks and cars that we have in Australia, we will have batteries in our vehicles that are 5 times the storage capacity of the Snowy Hydro system. And that
Wow.
will be an incredible component of our actual electricity network. So the transport system connects into the electricity system, and electricity is a thing that we can make in Australia. We can make it really easily. So there's not many countries that have kind of a clearer answer to the question, how would we not use oil anymore? Like in Australia, it's like we can make tons of electricity, and now there are electric vehicles that can run on it. So that's the good news, is that the answer is obvious, and the bad news is it'll take a really long time to do that. But there's 3,000 people that buy a car every day, so we can get started tomorrow.
And good on you, Francis, for going to finding the positive flip on this. And wouldn't it be lovely that like if there's an unintended consequence of this disaster in the Middle East, is that it is pushing the global transformation to get us off fossil fuels, which of course for anybody involved in the climate movement or anybody involved in health,
Mm,
is something that we've been looking for a long time. And it's probably
mm.
not a way we could have predicted that we might kind of go down that road, but if it gets us there, then that's a bit of a plus.
Yeah.
And I like that idea about the electric vehicle fleet being able to kind of have a backup stability kind of factor in it. But I do want to turn to you now, Peter, and sort of talk about listening to what Francis was saying about electrification as a long-term answer, and and a short-term and a long and medium-term answer. What are the things that you're thinking about with farming, and are there aspects of farming where the electrification thing's not going to come online quickly enough, or there's stumbling blocks, or I'm really interested in your opinion.
No, I think we need to move faster. I think that the urgency needs to be recognised, but then I've thought that for the last 20 years, and it's, people have been slow to move. And even with this crisis now, I think we need to be aware that there will be people suggesting that we take a direction of building more refineries and more storage, and maybe drill the Great Australian Bight or whatever else they might come up with. Alternatively, we could take a different direction and say, right, the fossil fuel era is over, and start doing things like Bowen's battery rollout. I mean, that came out 6 months ago, maybe 12 months ago. And the last time I looked, they had over 200,000 batteries installed. Well, imagine the sort of crisis we'd be having if we didn't have those 200,000 batteries installed. I think farmers are rapidly electrifying everything they can. Their houses, their workshops, vehicles. There's issues with mobile machinery because it's a large thing, but I mean, we're moving towards drones for spraying and various things. So I think that will be another movement. The one problem I do see is that, for sowing large areas, you require high horsepower tractors, and for harvesting them fast, you need, again, high horsepower tractors or headers. And I'd say we're 10 years away from working out whether we're going to convert to electricity or batteries or ammonia or hydrogen or some other source. But, we've got a long way to go to get the big machinery off diesel. It may even be we might go to biofuels as a temporary solution or a permanent solution. I don't know, but we have to start seriously looking at that.
Yeah.
We import all our machinery from overseas pretty much, so we won't get a great deal of say in what direction it goes. The big, Case New Hollands and International will decide what machines they're going to make, and we'll have to catch up. The real danger is if we don't pay attention and we're left holding the ball at the end of the day. Like if, then we'll have a problem. As far as how I see, I think the intersection of climate, nature repair, food supply, and landscape repair all intersect in this sort of crisis at the moment, and we need to work on it. We will come out the other side the same as we did with COVID. I mean, I accept the heat issues. I think one of the big ones is going to be the health of workers trying to work in hot conditions. But we just can't keep taking short-term sort of answers when we need a long-term vision of how we're going to move forward. So,
Completely agree. Yeah, and obviously, we're I suppose our vulnerability to our sort of infrastructure dependency on fossil fuels is really being highlighted with this, awful event. And I feel like, there are solutions there, and it's almost like, so many of us have been trying to talk about these solutions for such a long time, and it's like, okay, now's the time, let's get on and do this. I am worried, however, though, about what the next few months, 6 months, year looks like for us in Australia. And, when I'm hearing so many stories about, oh, we're not going to be able to put the crops in. We know that food prices are going up and stuff. And I really would like you to answer, Peter, on like, is there anything that you see that we could do in the short term that could protect us in the community from, and if I know it might be a sort of a trickier question, but what can we do? Is there anything we can do in the short term to protect ourselves from, food
well,
insecurity and those sorts of things?
well, I think we need community resilience. I think we need to understand the problem. I mean, we've kicked off an issue in Australia with fuel scarcity, but every week, like I can remember back when Abbott was in government, we had 16 days supply in this country, and now we've got 30 days supply. There really isn't any need for this massive panic. Yes, we may run out of fuel in 2 or 3 months' time, and that might be something to worry about. But right now, I think if people could try and control their urge to protect themselves, which is it's a difficult urge. If the trucks stop, then supermarkets will run out of food in a week. And if you think you've got a problem now, wait till the community runs out of food, then you'll so we have to sort of get smart about saving where we can. Like, I think we need to shorten up the food miles that we currently have. We need to regionally distribute lots of products so they're not just in time. Like we've all gone down this just in time road because it's a little bit cheaper. Now we're finding out the real cost of that decision.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like there's no simple answers. Like ever since, I'd just like to say we've got an asset bubble in just about every class of asset in this country. And that has to burst. Like bubbles burst. I know that's painful when it happens, but it will happen. And people need to start thinking about that instead of just pretending that it'll all go on forever.
Isn't that the thing? And I suppose I'll just like what you said there about the need for us to kind of just keep a cool head, that we're, yes, it is scary. And of course, the media likes to, sensationalize things and that plays on people's fears. But, we saw with COVID, all the toilet paper wars and all of that sort of thing. If we start getting into that mentality, then we're going to be, this sort of hoarding mentality. And then we start, it's going to worsen societal divisions. And I think that's a big problem because, of course, some people really love to play on societal divisions, and that's not going to help us all get together. I wonder, Francis, in the last couple of days while you've been in Canberra with the big trucking electrification thing, did any of this stuff come up about what we're going to do in the short term for distribution, or was it more of a longer term view?
Look, I would say that I was in conversations that were more about those long-term challenges. I think that I've been to Canberra quite a bit in the last couple of years, and I will say that there is like a seriousness around Parliament House that that I haven't kind of sensed before, that I think people are understand that this is like a pretty, there's a lot of gravity to this national moment as well. Uh, and I guess that one thing that we could choose to do is that there could be actions that the government could ask people to take that are like kind of uh, like if they enacted the fuel kind of rationing style approaches that are supposed to be like the next stage of fuel management in, you know, in favor of making sure that things like regional centers and farming can continue to make sure that they actually have fuel. Um, I think there's an assumption that politicians don't want to rattle anyone and they don't want to step on anyone's lives, and we're all very independent. But I think we saw in COVID that actually there's a lot of willingness in Australia to act in the mutual interest and to think like a community and to think like a society. And if there's things that people in cities can do to help people in the regions continue to deliver food, and maybe we get public transport in the urban centres, and maybe farmers get discounted diesel, and it's like a moment when we can actually demonstrate that we do care about each other, which I think would be really valuable at a time when like there's so much kind of like region versus city division in the politics that people are running at the moment. And yeah, it'd be nice if we could find ways to do that. I mean, I did see another chart that pointed out if you lower speed limits from 100 to down to 80, it actually cuts your fuel use by about 25% because your air resistance is a cubic law of how much energy it takes. So I mean, you know, in the realm of Australian politics, cutting speed limits down is right up there on big asks for people, I suspect. But it's exactly that kind of thing that could make a difference.
And you know, some pretty obvious health benefits there, really. But and
Driving slower, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And also, I think what you're kind of alluding to is the tapping into our care for each other in the community, you know, and that if we create, you know, maybe this is a time when, you know, we talked a little bit before about, you know, we're having this division in society. This could be a unifying time to say, all right, how am I going to help my neighbour? You know, how are we going to work on this together? You know, carpooling, or, you know, like I've got an EV, you know, I can, you know, help get my neighbour around, all those sorts of things. You know, and I think rural communities would do that very well. And I think if we, urban communities could be encouraged to do it in a, you know, a sense of cross-community altruism, there could be something, you know, really positive about that, and perhaps and caring. And, you know, obviously we know that, you know, the thing that makes people resilient during disasters is knowing your neighbour. So maybe this is a time for us to know our neighbours and work together, because if, you know, if there is no food on the supermarket shelf, then things can get hairy pretty quickly. And maybe this is a way of us getting through that. Perhaps we could all, you know, choose to practice that ourselves personally, everybody who's on the call tonight. Let's
And
talk a bit
maybe
more.
the gas companies could tip in a little more tax revenue as well. That'd be cute.
That would help.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, that would be a, you know, polluters pay thing. That's been a big thing that DEA and a few of us have talked about over the last week or so, and that beautiful chart of how much money we would have now. Let's turn to you, Kim. Now let's talking a bit more about solutions. I think we've done a bit of, you know, defining the problem. You know, what would you like to see, Kim? How can we protect health in this time of oil instability?
Yeah, thanks, Kate, and appreciating that I'm kind of preaching to the converted here, and I'm loving just hearing Francis and Peter talk. So, but I do have a couple of things to say. I'm going to split this into kind of short-term resilience and long-term transition. So we're thinking about solutions in the short term. So we're in this now. This is happening. We need to see health explicitly treated as critical infrastructure and fuel planning, which is not the case everywhere. So there needs to be guaranteed fuel access for ambulances, community health, etc., primary care, with clear national triggers and transparent prioritisation, because this is a real problem and this is going to be a crisis for areas of our health system right now. We also need stronger local resilience. So things like backup power, electrified health transport, better integration across the board, so between hospitals, primary care and community, etc. Now, across Australia, we're moving towards these things, but this is a process. But all of these things will help in a future crisis like this. It's difficult for us to build up that resilience at this point. But I think some really interesting points have been raised, and it really had me thinking about things like local production. Now, of course, I'm not advocating for local fossil fuel production, don't get me wrong, but it just made me think about, we have, with globalization, we've moved to just whatever, it doesn't need to be made here, it can be made over there. But we are living in such a volatile world now. This is not going to settle down. This is the world we live in now. And I think we saw this during COVID as well, that how quickly the world can narrow to our own backyard. Um, but it's an opportunity as well, and we need to see it as an opportunity. So, um, we did this during COVID. We stood up mask manufacturing locally. We need to have a look at where we can invest, how we can turn this into an opportunity, how we can drive our economy as well in a really clean, green way that creates jobs for people too. I like to spruik South Australia. I know there's some SA people on the call. In 2006, SA was powered by 2% renewables. Next year, it will be nearly 100%. And that's whilst growing the South Australian economy as well. So it's not an either or, but we need to be thinking about this moment and how we can catalyze change. In the longer term, of course, the real solution for protecting health and security is reducing our dependence on fossil fuels altogether. Fossil fuel systems are inherently vulnerable to many things. So, supply shocks, price shocks, geopolitical instability, which we're seeing at the moment, those vulnerabilities also translate directly into health risks as well. And I think it's really important too. We're used to in health kind of talking about this in a health way, but reframing this in an appreciation that this is not just a climate strategy, it's a health and economic strategy as well. We know clean energy reduces all kinds of different health impacts, but it also dramatically lowers health costs as well. And we know that globally, if we look at health savings, the transition largely pays for itself. So, air pollution from fossil fuels, for example, about 5 million premature deaths globally each year. Those health costs alone exceed the cost of transitioning to clean energy across the world. So, it's a very, very powerful argument as well. We know that global health costs are about 1.1 trillion a year. In major economies, air pollution, climate related health harms about 5% of the GDP, which exceeds national health budgets. And then if we bring fossil fuel subsidies into it, that's up to about 1.6 trillion a year, which dwarfs any global health adaptation funding, which means all of our communities are paying twice, once through subsidies and another time through healthcare as well. So when we talk about the cost of transition, we don't talk enough about that enormous health bill that fossil fuels are already imposing on households, our communities, our hospitals, our governments. We really need to use this as a moment to say this is such a good argument that we need to move away from fossil fuels, but then we would not be in the mess we're in at the moment.
Yeah. And, and adopt a preventative mindset, right? Of, okay, so this is the crisis we have now, but what's the crisis in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Let's prevent that, do the right thing by people in the
Next
future.
month, exactly.
It seems so simple, right? If only they'd asked us all that time ago. Francis and Peter, before we open it up to questions, Francis, is there any other great big blue sky solutions that you'd like to see Australia sort of get into right now, see our communities get into right now?
One, yeah,
Peter,
you
go.
go, Francis.
Sorry, Francis, you go, and then Peter. Sorry,
Um,
Peter.
Well, I mean, I like to keep it pretty micro in a way. Look for the next machine near you that can go electric. I know that actually one of the biggest gas customers in New South Wales, at least, is the Health Services Department because there's so much linen drying done with gas, like just running dryers to sterilize the linen in hospitals is an enormous gas consumer. And the market for electric heat pump dryers is still early, and it's a supply chain thing. And there's a like one large company, Jensen, that's like a Danish headquartered company that are a big supplier of gas dryers. And we need those companies to actually be motivated to start selling electric versions of their products because these are kind of quiet back of house supply chains that don't get the big attention, but that need disruptive companies to come in and shake them up, or they need the companies themselves to actually do something. So we're starting to think about work on some of those kind of market campaigns of looking at like who are the companies that sell the fossil fueled machines because in some ways, it's almost not Santos and Woodside that are the problem. If you own a machine that needs gas to put in it, then you're kind of locked in. You've got to be able to buy that gas, and we're not really advocating for people to run around and put stuff in landfill. It's really a question of when you buy the next thing, do you buy an electric one that can actually run on renewables? So
Yeah.
that's the really important moment in the supply chain is those companies that sell equipment that make fossil fueled equipment and really pushing them to make electric powered ones. And that's our whole thesis. That's what electrifying everything means. But I think when you think through what that means commercially in a market, it leads you to some like pretty little like tactical bits and pieces. But again, in the health sector, health workers and doctors drive to work probably more than most sectors do, and because doctors travel so far for the work that they do and work night shifts and everything, it can be really hard to use public transport in the sector. So getting EVs right and getting EV charging at hospitals is actually also a really important part of the solution that people in the health sector can really act on themselves.
Absolutely. And, and maintain them. I was talking to someone today about how often they go to get plug their car in and the thing's been vandalized. And so that ongoing need for infrastructure. But yeah, also, you look around your house at the things that run on fossil fuels and think, okay, yes, I love the Rewiring Australia concept of when you get a new one, get the electric version, get the version that can run on renewables. And I must admit, I was looking at my barbecue in the backyard today and thinking, it's got a gas canister. Here's something that I can do. Back to you, Peter. What's your blue sky thinking? How could we solve this problem?
Well, the first thing government's going to tell you is they don't have the money, and I don't believe that sort of argument anymore. If we properly taxed the fossil fuel industry, whether it's by the diesel fuel rebate, that's only it's an eight to $10 billion issue, but it's only a small issue compared to what if we taxed these industries the way they do overseas in some places, like why are we the second biggest or the first biggest gas exporter and get practically nothing from it? It's just
Doesn't quite make
outrageous. If we
sense.
had done that 10 years ago, we would have the money to put electric charging stations up the highways and all sorts of things and, improve hospitals and, it beggars belief what we could do if we got serious about moving away from fossil fuels. And even to do that, we've got to find money, for research because fossil fuels, for heaven's sakes, produce most of our chemicals for agriculture. They produce most of the resin for packaging that we eat our food out of. They produce, it's insidious all the
They
way
got a
through
whole
our economy.
Yeah.
And we have to extract it out of the economy. And the only way we're going to do that is with research and innovation and all sorts of things. I like what Francis is saying, but I would pick one little bone. I don't think it's fair to say that the consumers are responsible. It's a bit like farmers and their machinery. We need machineries and we demand machinery, but we don't get a choice in what we get to buy. We get a fleet of options coming from the major producers. And if we don't like it, we don't buy it. And I would suggest that a lot of the gas industry and fossil fuels have set the industry up. I mean, I was involved with what is it called? The National Vehicle Emission Standards. And
Yeah.
that was fought tooth and nail by the car manufacturers and everybody else because they don't want to change. They've got them that's the system. And to suggest that consumers are driving that is laughable. That the consumers will buy whatever's in the dealer's shop. That's all they've got.
Yeah. Yeah. And you go back to your point a second ago about this, that it's almost like fossil fuels have got the whole supply chain wrapped up. Like if our nitrogen fertilizers are a gas byproduct or, plastics are made from
Yeah,
petrochemicals,
that's
so much of the supply chain comes from fossil fuels. And so I suppose the second point that you're making is then does it not come back then to our governments to enforce these things and to, like we've got the polluters pay tax 25% on the table at the moment. That would be something, but also to have some courage in the legislation that they make, so they're not swayed by the fossil fuel industry and doing things in their interests.
Oh, look, absolutely. I think a lot of our politicians lack courage to do what they need, and the system is stacked against them. I mean, huge amounts of money go into getting governments elected, and a large portion of that comes from donors, and those very same donors, heaven forbid, get large subsidies. It's almost like a wheel goes round, and you take a piece of money off the table every time it goes round. But
Some
yeah,
might call it revolving door politics, Peter, perhaps those terms.
well, I mean, I like every time I go to Canberra, I'm shocked. But I think there are a growing number of politicians on all sides of the where they sit, or benches. And I think there are people there with good intentions. And I think we, the community, need to be more vocal in demanding those things. I mean, we don't demand a lot of stuff that we should be demanding. I mean, it scares the hell out of me that we went through January with 40+ degree temperatures, and I still haven't seen how many people died. Maybe somebody knows, but yeah, the number of deaths that are caused by these heat waves that are not going to be 1 or 2 day heat waves, they're going to be 10 days to 20 days.
Yeah.
And there's a huge population that don't have air conditioners, that can't afford it. And we know they go down to the supermarket to get cool. Well, I suspect they won't make it to the supermarket. They'll die on the footpath from the temperature. So, like we just cannot continue to turn a blind eye to all this stuff.
Indeed, we cannot. When it's 38 degrees at 7 o'clock in the morning, like it was in Adelaide a few weeks ago, that's not business as usual. That's a changed climate. And and we should all be very angry and lay the blame at the feet of the people that put us in it.
Well, I'll just add one more thing, because I think it's very important. Like, we're worried here today about whether we run out of diesel, and that could have an impact on agriculture. In Australia, we've gone past 1.5 degree increase.
Yeah.
And by 2032, we'll go past 2 degrees. That's, what is that, 7 years away, 6 years away?
Yeah.
And when we do that, we won't be sitting around saying, oh, what can we do to change it? We will have gone past tipping points, and we may not be able to change it. And that will have a devastating impact on agriculture. So we've got about 6 years to get our heads straight and start seriously doing what Francis wants us to do, and that's electrify everything and move away from, it's not an option anymore. It's a battle we're in, and if we want to survive, this is what we have to do.
No, we agree with you, Peter. And, I think, and Kim would probably say there too, that, for us in the medical world, it's like, let's put the health of the community above the interests of the fossil fuel industry and recognise that the time is now, and there is no time to kick this can down the road at all anymore. I think let's get some questions. Thank you all for this beautiful discussion. I've got some questions in the chat. But I'm happy if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question. Is there anyone who wants to show us their face and ask us a question? Or not? Are we all shy? I know half of you're not shy people. I'll find one while someone gets their courage up. Angie, you've got one in the chat. Do you want me to just read it out, or do you want to read it?
I'm happy to say it if you like.
Yeah, sure.
It was really directed at Peter, but I know Francis has already started to answer the question. I am increasingly worried about our focus on energy means that we're not thinking about what the fossil fuel companies are doing to protect their revenue and locking us into other petrochemical products like pesticides and fertilizers. So I'm interested to understand how reliant we are in Australia on fossil fuel-based fertilizers and pesticides. And, are there ready alternatives that we could be advocating for that are healthier, accessible, affordable?
Yeah, there are. Like, we're 100% dependent on fossil fuel fertilizer at the moment. And I would say we're 100% dependent on chemicals. I don't know of many that are, you can get the odd natural chemical, but we all use glyphosate and every other damn thing, and that's all comes out of the fossil fuel industry. So if you look at nitrogen, for argument's sake, New South Wales University are doing research on how to, I don't exactly know how this works, but they put a charge of electricity through nitrogen and whatever mix, they call it plasma, and it turns into ammonia or turns into calcium nitrate, I think it is, that comes out the other end. Now they're building that in a container that you can put on farms. Now, if that turns out to work, farmers will be able to produce their own fertilizer for use at sowing by running this thing all year round, by having a few acres of solar panels. So yes, there's ways of doing this. I mean, I always think we're very, very lucky. If we were trying to solve this problem 50 years ago, we would have a big problem because we wouldn't have had all the renewable energy knowledge that we now have now. But we know, like most of these things, like Gina Reinhardt, for argument's sake, has electrified her mine. And yes, she runs around the country going, oh, no, we've got to keep using gas. Like the miners know. I was over went to Newman in the Pilbara to have a look at whaleback. BHP's got huge electric EV trucks running up and down their mine. They know what's coming. They know they can do it. They just haven't found it's just not economically costing them enough to shift. So
hence a tax, right?
Yeah. So we know what we can do. We just have to find the strength to do it.
This is it. The time for bravery is here. Let's grab it. There's another question in the chat from Stuart. I don't know, Stuart, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, or I can ask it for you if you like. I'm not seeing any movement from Stuart's grey square. So this is for anybody who wants to answer, Francis and Kim. There's no doubt that the energy requirements of urban and rural communities are profoundly different. In our cities, we already have the opportunity to reduce use of fossil fuels, working from home, carpooling, public transport, alternative transport such as bikes and feet. Can anyone think of other immediate ways to reduce fuel use in the city so we could redirect to rural communities? Anyone got any other great ideas there?
I mentioned driving slower already.
Yeah, drive slower, carpool, don't go there, work from home.
I don't like the idea of separating urban from rural. I think there's many, like rural communities are used to working together, and we all have something called Facebook these days, apparently. And nearly every town I know has got a Facebook page. So it won't take long before people, and I've already seen it, people say, oh, you're going to Young today? Yep, get a lift.
Yeah.
So I think rural people will figure it out. Yeah, it'll be tough, but it'll be just as tough for people in Sydney.
I don't know. Have a look.
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to that sense of community that we were trying to sort of allude to before, and maybe this is a wonderful time that we can, try and unify with each other and basically just help each other out and be nice, and kind. Kim, do you have any last words you'd like to say about, our need to get off oil and what a health opportunity it could be?
Yes, look, I think I've, done my little monologue about it. What I would say to the health people in the room is that health is such a powerful lever. We don't get out of our little health silo enough to go and talk about this. I threw some stats out there. There's lots more around as well to say actually the health argument is just incredible in terms of making that argument for economics as well, to say we can pay for everything. The global transition we can pay for with avoided health costs, which is pretty amazing. So we need to be very, very loud about that. I think in the short term, just really appreciating too, and this has been said by, I think, all of us on the panel a number of times, is that those who are suffering the most, and this is the whole cruelty of the climate crisis, really, those who are suffering the most right now are people who are already suffering in many ways as well, who are already living in poverty, etc. They are going to be more impacted than those of us who have a bit more money and have an EV and are talking about this, but aren't making those decisions either. So I think it's really, really important to keep that in mind too. Even for all of us on this call who care deeply about this, the impacts are not equally felt. And we really need to be advocating for those in the community who are suffering more.
Absolutely, recognising our responsibility in a social justice piece. Francis, do you have any sort of last words that you want to share with the group?
I just was reflecting. I think Peter was making some really good points as well, and I mean also Kim. But I was thinking about how our politicians are by and large they're trying, right? Like I don't they're not actually openly corrupt. I just think it's really like it's actually quite hard for them to get feedback. It's hard for them to send messages in 2026. They used to get kind of a 45-second grab on the nightly news on one of four channels that we all watched, and there was a bit of a more of a shared understanding. And it's actually really hard to navigate like engaging Australians, but they're really open and they're really interested in hearing from their constituents, and it doesn't take that many people to change their minds. So I just want to leave people with a message to like contact your local representative and like I noted this in the chat, but right now the thing that is like actually quite plausible is getting a 25% tax on the gas exports. And I thought that was a crazy idea when people started pitching it to me last year, to be honest. I'm like, they'll never let that happen. But the economics of it are actually really good in the situation we're facing. It effectively means that gas that you export, it makes gas a bit cheaper onshore, which is not something I'm always advocating for, but it will actually help with the economics that the government's trying to manage for there to be an effective 20% discount on the price that domestic users would pay versus export users because of how that 25% levy would actually work. And it also tops up the government's coffers in a way that does the kind of budget repair that Treasury's insisting that they do. So it's got a lot going for it, and I was saying like if you go through Canberra Airport, the billboards tell you that the gas companies are freaking out in a huge way right now. Like they are very worried that this could get real. And I just saw someone also showing like they're giving people like $50 JB Hi-Fi gift cards right now to do push polling things that ask you questions like tick all the things that the mining tax royalties pay for, like health services, something else, something like literally they're just like paying people for the right to tell them that mining pays for doctors or something. So they're worried, is what I would say, and they're up against it when there's a 75% of Labor voters and 75% of One Nation voters want to see that tax get up. That's the kind of thing that Albo can get behind. So so take action on that and let your local politician know that you're keen on a gas tax right now because the budget's on May 7th or something, or May 12th.
Might be a sort of thing about social justice and equity as well, right? I mean, the devil's advocate in me does want to say that if we start taxing fossil fuels, then there's an argument for keeping them, like we have done with tobacco. But there is obviously an equity thing, and it's not fair that they have created this great big mess that they should possibly pay for it. I think a lot of people on this call, it's very, very easy to ring your elected representative. They're elected to represent us. It doesn't take much to call them up. And, they're always very friendly. No one's ever rude to you. You just say hello, you introduce yourself, you say who you are, you live in the electorate, and this is what I want. And usually a staffer just writes down your comment on a piece of paper and feeds it back, and you become counted as a person that cares. And I think they used to say that a letter was worth 500, the opinion of 500 voters. I don't know what a phone call is worth now, but it's certainly worth more than your one vote. All right. There is a bit of a question about Fortescue mining. Does anyone know about that? Twiggy's going electric. I think you sort of alluded to that before, Peter. Does anyone know the facts on that? Is Fortescue mining electrifying all its mining machinery is the question.
Not particularly, but he has advocated the removal of the diesel fuel credit for that sector of the industry. For those that are interested, there's 15 major companies getting more than $50 million in rebate each year, and they're all mining and gas companies. So, there's plenty of room there to move. Everybody thinks it's the truckies and the farmers that get to do fuel rebate, and yes, they do, but they only get a very small share of it compared to the really big users. There's no agricultural company in Australia getting a $50 million rebate, whereas there are mining companies.
There we go.
And I just add, I think what Twiggy and Fortescue are doing is the real deal. I think it's quite important work. And their LinkedIn page is a good one to follow to like keep up with the latest enormous machines that are arriving on some sites. Like there are some big electric mining bits of equipment that are in operation now. So really applaud the way they're going about it.
It'll be
sorry, Peter, you on?
Yeah, it'll be the mining industry that drives whatever we end up using in heavy tractors and headers. The companies will produce for the mining industry, and then they'll just take the same motor and stick it in a tractor.
That's it. All right. Kim, did you just want to add something, and then Michael, I see you.
I was just going
Excuse
to
me, Kate.
jump on.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, so sorry. I was just going to jump on what we're saying about Twiggy, just that he's really walking the walk as well on an international stage. So he's regularly out there at COP speaking about this aggressively in ways that not many people are. So I think what is being done shouldn't be discounted.
Absolutely. All right, Michael, do you want to add one last thing before we finish up for the evening?
Actually, Kate, if I could say something,
Yep.
I actually have Fortescue shares, so I receive all their correspondence and latest updates. And yes, they are definitely walking the talk. And okay, they're importing all sorts of new machines from Germany. They bought a British electric car racing team to get access to the latest engine technology. And that is called you're really sticking your neck out just to prove that you can do it. I'm now doing it. Gina's now hopping on the bandwagon. But meantime, as has been done, she goes around campaigning for fossil fuels. But no, that's all from me. Twiggy's definitely doing what he talks about.
Yeah, and he does a lot of stuff on heat health as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you very much, Kimberly, for participating in our webinar on quitting our oil dependency. And personally, I'm feeling like there's, it's an impetus for change. Like now is the time for change. Let's have our courage and act. We have so many great answers. We just have to get on and do it, keep our heads in the process, and look out for each other. I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.